And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hola.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. You?
I am doing all right. It's beautiful and cold here in Colorado, and I'm cleaning out my garage. Not right at this moment, but it's an ongoing
Is it,
process.
if that's a euphemism, I don't know that one.
It is not a euphemism.
Okay. Good.
Welcome to Dream Idiots, everybody, where each week Brian and I tell stories to each other to amuse ourselves, and we hope it amuses you too. Would you say that's an accurate interpretation of our intent?
Absolutely. That's spot on. We're just dragging your asses along for the ride, and hopefully you are at least moderately amused as well. We've gotten some good feedback so far. And actually we are now officially on, I think, pretty much every platform. So Apple Podcasts, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and then if you don't want
Podcast
to
Addict.
yep. I mean, I think if you can't find us now, you can just go to dreamidiots.com and click listen now, and then you can listen without having to download an app. You can just listen on the fly straight through the website.
Woohoo! And it is an even numbered episode, so that means I get to go first.
You're correct.
Well, I want to take us back to the late 1980s, Brian, and talk about the main drag where we hung out.
Mhm.
Walsham Road. Now, this road had everything teenagers could want. We had a mall right next to our high school, right? I mean, it's now gone, but we had a mall there at one time. There were fast food joints all up and down the road. We had 3 different supermarkets. We had gas stations. The northern edge of the store of the street had a record store, Blockbuster Video, an ice cream shop. We also had our churches along one side, the Methodist Church, where I spent many a Sunday morning and Wednesday evening was there. But it was along the northern side where I first saw someone that I'm going to call Prophet John. Do you know who Prophet John is, Brian?
I have no idea. No.
Okay. It was between the Baskin Robbins and the Sound Warehouse. From a distance, he looked like a teenager. He looked like one of us. But if you got closer, you could see he was older than that, maybe even in his early 40s. And he was often sunburned, windburned. He clearly lived outside, but he wore the most amazing outfits, just resplendent clothes of bright colors and patterns. Picture a blend of Disney's Aladdin and the 3 wise men of the Nativity, and you kind of get a sense of what he looked like. Complete with the little pointed shoes as well, like an elf might wear.
Mm-hmm.
John always carried a sign with rambling, hand-scripted biblical passages on it of incredibly tiny print. Sometimes he carried a palm frond with him. Sometimes he had both. Is this ringing any bells? You never saw him along Walsham Road?
Carrying the palm frond, that kind of rings a bell. Yeah.
He would often stand on the sidewalk with the sign resting on his shoulder. He would pace back and forth. It was like he was participating maybe in a picket line that only he could see. And the time I recall seeing him, he was spinning in place, whipping himself with a palm frond right on the sidewalk. I don't remember when I started calling him Prophet John. I didn't do it to be mean, but I had to call him something. And I never had the common courtesy to find out his name. And that's an inaction, something I didn't do that I regret all these years later. But the name stuck. My mother used it when she described an encounter she had witnessed in a sewing store when John came in and said, "You have such pretty things here." The storekeeper told my mother he often stopped by just to look at the bolts of fabric. And our fellow idiot traveler, Bill, who managed the Dungeon comic book store on Walsham Road, recalls John coming in several times. And every now and then he would buy a comic from Bill, or Bill would give him, I'm guessing, remainders that were damaged or whatever. And
Right.
he was very much concerned about comic books affecting his soul, which we all know is true. They will affect your soul. But Bill would point out that, well, this is approved by the Comics Code Authority, so I think it's okay. It's got the seal on it. And that would appease him, and he'd take his comic and go off and read it somewhere. Now, when I went off to college, I saw less and less of John. I might see him during a summer break, but as with all things, he kind of recessed to the back of my mind. But about a decade later, he popped up again when I had a question, a serious question. Whatever happened to him? My mother had not seen him. Neither had friends who lived in the area. Folks who worked the restaurants or shops along the street, if they remembered him at all, had no idea what had happened to him. Now, the short answer is that he had died. I talked to a police officer one morning while out for coffee and asked him if he knew of Prophet John. He said, sure, I remember him. We had to take him out to the state hospital, San Antonio State Hospital, a few times. He often spent the colder months there. He went out there one winter and got sick and never came out. Now, this came as no real surprise to me, but I was still saddened to learn of his passing, because by this time I'd lived in different cities all across the country and had met people like John. In Salt Lake City, there were 2 Vietnam veterans who would often stop in the laundromat where I did my clothes to get warm. I would sometimes buy them coffee and maybe a muffin or two and sit and talk a bit. New York City had a howling man who roamed around First Avenue and 67th at all hours. He didn't respond to social interaction. Houston had a man sitting under the Highway 59 overpass in Rice Boulevard. He also had this large sign with incredibly small print. But unlike John, this man's story was that the deceased Mexican actor Cantinflas was tracking his movements and hunting him. And he was very serious about it. Cantinflas is looking for me. The last time I was in Houston, I didn't see him there. And outside of Denver, where I live now, there are tents along the fence of a local state park where I worked one winter. And these inhabitants of these little tent cities would push their belongings into the park on a grocery cart. USAFacts.org estimates that there are 580,000 unhoused people living in the United States. And this is prior to COVID, obviously. That's according to HUD. California, Texas, New York, Florida lead the way. 354,000 are sheltered, but still unhoused. Mental illness policy.org from a 2015 study indicates that 25% are seriously mentally ill. That accounts for about 145,000. And a total of 45% have some sort of mental illness, whether serious or not. Between 1955 and 2000, beds per 100,000 people in psychiatric hospitals went from 339 down to 22. That's
Holy
Unite.
moly.
I know, that's from uniteforsight.org. In general, in this country, we've had a swing away from larger institutional systems to ones that are community-based, from a national system to more of a local system. And this approach can work, but it can only work if the community-based systems have good financial and government support at the federal level. And I think overall, when we think about local things, it's extremely important to remember that this man was not Prophet John. He was the man I called Prophet John. I should know his real name, but I don't know the name that his friends and family no doubt called him. So I'm sorry, sir. We let you down. I think of Prophet John often. And I know this is two kind of rough stories in a row, but this is one I feel the need to talk about this time of year because spring is a migratory season. Mm-hmm. And here in Denver, we're starting to see more folks come up to the cooler climes and get ready for summer here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
And it's just reinforcement to me that we still do not take, despite the strides we've made, we don't take mental health policy seriously enough in this country. And there's really no excuse for it. And I know Austin has an extremely large unhoused population as well.
Yeah, Austin has a terrible issue. I'm not really sure what I've heard. Sort of different anecdotal stories about why it's gotten bad here. There have been obviously a couple hurricanes. Katrina, I know, displaced a whole bunch of folks from New Orleans, and then there was that hurricane that came through Houston 4 or 5 years ago, which displaced even more. And so that seemed to sort of coincide when we started really seeing the tent cities in various easements and in parks and in different areas where that population seemed to really explode. And with all the money coming into Austin for high tech, Austin has done just absolutely shitty job with it. You mentioning, someone named Prophet John. I mean, I've lived in Austin for coming up on 28 years, 29 years, long ass time. Mostly in South Austin. And when I first 94, 95, there was a guy who I genuinely think his first name is John, who would traipse up and down South Lamar in Austin, Texas, had a fairly long scruffy beard, and in the mid 90s was brown. And he was always walking at a clip and gesturing, and he'd stop and he's having an imaginary conversation. He's always seemed sort of angry. He's still there. I mean, I see this guy even now in 2022. I'm now back in South Austin again. He's still there. His beard is now white. He's still walking at as fast as he possibly can, gesturing and yelling. And over 25 years, I've handed him. I actually carry little things of food in my car for homeless because they're everywhere here. So if you hand him food, he won't say anything to you. He'll take it, but he doesn't kind of acknowledge you. And someone years ago told me his name was John, and so I've seen this guy over 25 years. I've seen this guy, I guarantee it, 200 times.
Yeah.
And he's just, is he homeless because he's crazy? Is he crazy because he's homeless? Does it really matter? No. He's still a human being, and he has been marginalized and overlooked.
And I think, your point to when people get displaced because of events like hurricanes, because Lord knows Houston's been hit with enough over the last 10 or 15 years, New Orleans too. Nothing as big and as bad as Katrina, but if we start at the basic level of taking care of these mental health issues, when events like a natural disaster happen, there's less of a problem dealing with an unhoused community if we've already taken care of those who are unhoused because of mental illness. And this idea that, they're homeless by choice, that is just,
that's horseshit. Right.
I absolutely, it just, when we get to the point where the best we can do is buy them a muffin and coffee and just talk to them, know their name. That's heartbreaking that's what we can do when we are still one of the richest countries in the world.
Right.
And we have a chance to make this difference. And why, if we hadn't gone away from a nationally financed system that helps people, what kind of situation would be in now? I know that's playing the hypothetical game, but we've got to get better at this. We just have to. Right. Well,
it should be a priority, but it's not an issue anyone really wants to talk about, and it's hard to garner votes for it. I mean, the consensus in Austin seems to be that, yes, we know that there are homeless folks here, and as long as we don't have to look at them, we're fine. And so I believe it's the case that that what was called the camping ban in Austin was reinstated. So you're allowed to be homeless in Austin. You just can't be visibly homeless. So as long as you're homeless out of sight, whatever. And that's been deemed our solution. So happy Easter, everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry about that. I've just had this percolating in the back of my mind for a while. So I promise the next one is going to be a lot better. But anyway.
Who would Jesus disparage and overlook?
Exactly. And, I hope we get better at this. And when I see group like, Cub Scout packs and things like that going to work at food kitchens, I'm like, that's a start. Good. Right. That's a start.
Right. Sure.
Helping create city food banks. Terrific. That's a start. Let's keep going with it. Anyway, right. That's all I got for this week.
Nice. Well, good job. Way to bring the group down. I mean, my God.
I know it seems like